Hey all, in this video and also in the next video, we're going to be looking at monopolies. And so in part one of this Monopoly series, we are going to be taking a look at the characteristics of monopolies and also what the graphs look like for this market structure in particular. All right, let's get started. All right, so monopolies. And so as stated in the intro, this is going to be a two-part video. The first part are just the basic stuff, and the second part we're going to go a little bit more in depth here. So let's get started. So the characteristics of a monopoly. So the first one is that there is one large firm, that the firm is the market itself. So at perfect competition, right, we have to draw both the market and the firm graph because the firm is reliant on the market because in perfect competition, firms are price takers. But with the monopoly and oligopolies and monopolistic competition, they are all price makers. So basically, the firm is the market itself. So the good news with Unit 4 and these three different imperfect market structures is that you only have to draw this one graph. The second characteristic is that they have unique products. There are no substitutes. Because if there were substitutes, there would be competitors, meaning that the firm isn't a monopoly. There are high barriers to entry, which should make sense, right? Monopoly means you have one firm controlling a vast amount of the market shares, right? There has to be high barriers. They are price makers, right? Which is really important, right? They can set their own prices if they want to sell or sell more or sell less. And then lastly, right, there are some advertising, right? And that's probably the least important characteristic here. So before we get started, right, can a monopoly be good? Well, the quick answer is going to be yes, a monopoly can be good. So our example on this slide are electric companies. And so if there were 3 or more competing electrical companies, they would have higher operating costs. Why? Why would there be higher operating costs? Well, they will be competing, right, for scarce resources. And so this competition for scarce resources would lead to higher price or really higher costs, right? Which would then lead to higher prices for the consumer. And so here, in this sense, having only one electrical company, right? So only having Dominion Power, right, is good because it helps keeps prices low. There is no one competing for those same resources with Dominion Energy. And so we're going to call that a natural monopoly. So a natural monopoly, an example, is really any utility company that we have, right? So think of like electrical, water, gas, that sort of thing. And the reason they're called natural monopolies is because of economies of scale. Remember, economies of scale is the more you produce, the less expensive it is to produce, right? The lower the costs. And so if you think about like our electrical company, Dominion Power, providing power to the first home is astronomically expensive, right? But providing power to the 100th home is less expensive. Providing power to the 1,000,000th home is less expensive than that, right? Because you already have the infrastructure and all the pipes and the wires, right, just already laid out. And so because of that, we have economies of scale, which makes it a natural monopoly. It is natural for one firm to produce because only they can produce at the lowest possible cost. So in this sense, monopolies can be good. So let's draw our monopolies now. So some good news right before we start. There's only a singular graph, only one graph, because we talked about this earlier. The firm is the market. The firm is the industry. The cost curves are all the same, meaning, right, we still have a marginal cost, our AVC, our ATC, our marginal revenue, our demand curve, right? So they are all the same, just our marginal revenue demand curve look different, right? And we talked about that in our first video, right? Because firms cannot price discriminate, our marginal revenue and demand are both downward sloping and are two separate curves. Most importantly, though, the MR equals MC rule still applies. We still have our profit maximizing point. So just like perfect competition, with imperfectly competitive market structures, you still want to go to that MR equals MC point first. And also the shutdown rule still applies, right? If the firm cannot cover its variable costs, the firm should still shut down, right? So let's draw it. So Our X and Y axis, right? Our X axis is still quantity, right? Our Y axis is still price. So let's draw in all of our curves here. Well, here, right, we first stated, right, that our demand and marginal revenue curves are different, right? They're both downward sloping, but our marginal revenue is no longer part of our demand curve here. And our demand curve is still, right, equal to our price because the demand represents the price that consumers are willing to pay at that specific output. We still have our marginal cost curve. Right? And then we also still have, right, our ATC. And then we could draw in our AVC, right? But this firm's making a profit, so we don't need to draw in the AVC here. So this is our basic monopoly graph. Like I said, the good news is that what you see on the screen right now, this is going to be the same graph for monopolies, the same graph for monopolistic competition, and the same graph for oligopolies. So if you just know this one graph, you know all three graphs for this entire unit here. And so here, right, we said in the last slide, we still want to go to where MR equals MC. That is still the profit maximizing point. So this represents MR equals MC, right? So this represents our quantity. What is different, however, is we do not go directly across for the price, right? That is not our price. And the reason for that is because monopolies and oligopoly and monopolistic competition are price makers. They don't have to charge that equilibrium price. So what they're going to do instead is go up to the demand curve, which represents at this specific quantity, the price and the demand, right, for that quantity, right? And that is going to become our price equilibrium there. And then still where it intersects with the ATC, right? This right here represents our total cost, right? So this box right here, right, would represent the area of profit. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the maximization of profit, that MR equals MC point. So on the following slides, what we're going to do together is we're going to identify the output that the monopoly should produce, the MR equals MC. We're also going to say where the total revenue is, where the total cost is, and the area of profit or loss. Right, so let's look at this. So we have our downward sloping demand. Remember, demand also equals our price. So here, right, where is this firm going to produce? Well, here, right, we know we want to go to where MR equals MC, right? So this firm is going to produce Q1. Well, what price is this firm going to charge at Q1? Well, it's not going to be P1, right? The reason why it's not P1 is because the monopoly doesn't need to do that. They can charge a higher price. Remember, they're going to go all the way up to the demand curve because the demand curve represents the price that consumers are willing to pay for this specific amount, for this specific output, right? So in other words, right, at this MR equals MC point, this firm is going to be producing Q1 and they're going to be charging P3, meaning, right, that P3 times Q1, right? So let's write this out. P3 times Q1 is going to get us to our total revenue. Well, what about total cost, right? Total cost. So here, it's pretty much the same as perfect competition. We have this MR equals MC point. We drew our lines up and down, right? We got to A, which represents the price. Well, where this line intersects with our ATC, so at point B, represents the price or the cost for a single good that's produced. But we know it's not a single good. We know that Q1 is being produced, right? So P2 times Q1 is going to get us to our total cost here. And then that leads us to the area of profit. Well, because our total cost or our ATC is below the price, that means there's going to be a profit. Well, how much profit? Well, the area in between P3 and P2, so P3, P2, A, and B, so this area shaded in green right here, represents the area of profit. Right? And so that is our total revenue, total costs, how much quantity, what the equilibrium price is, and the area of profit for a monopoly graph, which is also the same thing as a monopolistic competition graph, and also, right, the same thing as an oligopoly graph here. So conclusion. Monopolists are going to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? That is never going to change. MR equals MC is still the profit maximizing point. However, right, the monopolies are going to overcharge in a sense. They're going to charge the price that consumers are willing to pay as identified by the demand curve itself. So they're not just going to go horizontally where MR equals MC. They're going to continue to go up to that demand curve there. So at the end of the day, monopolies underproduce but they overcharge their consumers. So they're producing less and charging more because they can. They're monopolies. They're basically the only firm within the market. All right, so before we end this video, I wanted to do one more practice. So what I want you guys to do is identify the area of total revenue, the area of total cost, and the area of profit or loss. Right? So pause the video, try to figure out those three things: total revenue, total cost, and also the area of profit or loss. And then we'll end the video for today. All right. So here, right, the very first point that we want to get to is where MR equals MC, right? And so we know that this firm is going to be producing Q1, but they're not going to be charging P1, right? That's not their price. We want to go all the way up to where the demand curve, because the demand represents our price. And so we know, right, that the firm is going to charge P3 for Q1 amount of units produced. So if we're using the letterings on the graph, and let's just call this 0, right? We know, right, that our total revenue is just price times quantity, or in other words, the area is P3, C, Q1, and 0, right? That is the area of total revenue. Well, what about the area of total cost, right? What is the area of total cost here? Well, here, if we know we want to produce our MR equals MC, right, we go all the way up to our ATC, and so it costs them P5 to produce Q1 units. So our area of total cost is P5, A, Q1, and 0. So where is the area of profit or loss here then? Well, here, first of all, is this firm making a profit or a loss? Well, this firm is making a loss because the area of total cost is greater than our area of total revenue. And so here, the difference between P5 and P3, the price and the cost per the average unit, right, which is shaded in purple here, represents the area of loss. All right, so that is the area of loss there. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope everything made sense. I'll catch you guys in part 2 of our Monopoly video. And so I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.